Thanks, Lisa, and thanks for having me along today. So my name's Jarlath Molloy. I'm Director of Strategic Affairs at the IFRS Foundation. Some of you might not have heard of the IFRS Foundation. It actually can trace its history back about 50 years. And about 20 years ago, it set up the International Accounting Standards Board, which writes international accounting standards. And then a couple of years ago, it did the same for sustainability. And last year, it launched new sustainability standards. And so each of these two boards sit within the IFRS Foundation, and the standards are typically picked up by regulators and governments around the world, and for companies then to adopt and apply. I have two areas of responsibility. Firstly, I support an international capacity building program, which is designed to really just help get people started, help them get familiar with the standards. So I'm looking down because I have a copy of them here beside me. They're about 45 pages each. And secondly, I lead the Foundation's internal sustainability team, which focuses on our own internal sustainability performance. I'm also a former preparer as well, so I'm familiar with pushing water uphill and every other idiom you can think of that conveys that struggle. And I guess I'm here today to talk about how these worlds collide and offer some thoughts that might be of interest.
So thank you very much for that intro, Jarlath. The first question that we're going to have a chat about is, how is sustainability data useful in decision making?
I guess we all know instinctively that data is really critical for decision making, but it's also important for disclosures, and in particular the ISSB standards. And the ISSB standards make or ask for disclosures of both quantitative and qualitative data. But I guess we need to recognize that the data, while it is of course valuable, is ultimately just a proxy for the risks that a company faces and the opportunities, obviously, as well, that it can potentially seize. And if you think about an annual report, in many respects, it's just a snapshot in time. It's a simple reflection of how a company is managing these things at the year end. And so I guess we have to ask ourselves, well, what really is the significance of these disclosures that we spend so much time working on? Where's the so what for all of this? And I guess what I would point to is actually the answer here really lies with decision making, both internally, like in terms of your company's strategy, but also for your investors.
The next one was, who are the ISSB? Sorry, that needs to put my teeth in to just get that one right again. So who are the ISSB standards designed for?
So the objective of this ISSB standards is to require companies to disclose information about their sustainability risks and their opportunities in a way that's useful for investors. Now, obviously, there's lots of other stakeholders involved here as well, and that's not to discount their role. But the IFRS Foundation, its mission is to develop standards that bring transparency and accountability to capital markets around the world. That's our mandate. It's to focus on investor decision making. Now, I don't know, some of you might have seen yesterday in the FT, one of the ISSB board members, Richard Barker, he had an opinion piece, and in it he was talking about if you look at disclosures or annual reports in terms of share price performance and access to capital, investors want to know how any business is reporting on responding to sustainability risks and opportunities. And this kind of reporting, it's not meant to be a compliance exercise, even though some obviously that's exactly all it is. It's meant to be a communication of value creation, and ultimately all economic activity depends on nature, in one way or another. And what Richard was saying yesterday was a sustainable economy is obviously much more valuable than one that's heading for a collapse, for example.
I mean, I do have to agree that I don't understand where we're missing the logic that we have to protect the environment that the businesses operate in for the businesses to operate in. And I struggle with feeling that I'm beating people to death with logic on that, but maybe that's for when we talk later. The next question that we're going to explore is, we hear a lot about the growing reporting burden, but what makes the ISSB standards different?
I guess this is probably close to the hearts of many in your community. Endless requests for supply chain information and carbon and whatever else. And when you pick up the standards here, hopefully you realize pretty quickly that it's not actually just as simple as the next disclosure request that you've got in your inbox. It kind of goes beyond your CFO asking you to start hoovering up data from across your company because there's a new CDP questionnaire to fill in, and as valuable as they are, I don't want to discount that, but actually the aim is kind of different. So if you do it correctly, if you implement the disclosure standards properly, it will help you develop meaningful relationships with teams across your company. It's kind of like it forces you to talk to your colleagues in perhaps teams that you wouldn't normally engage with on a day-to-day basis, because you just can't get the information otherwise. And I guess that the consequence of that is that it prompts collaboration, and ultimately change, and all the way up to the exco and the board. Because if you do it properly, it should prompt a discussion about how embedded sustainability is actually in your strategy, rather than simply a footnote in your annual report.
Yeah, and it feels that it's an opportunity to create that systems thinking within an organisation. I know 20 years ago that when data was becoming a corporate pillar that was being added into the organisational hierarchy and structure, it was to break down the silos. And for me, the sustainability conversation is another way to break down those silos, because your business is one system, it's one organism, and moving away from that factory thinking to actually how does the organisation operate within its landscape, I think it's a more interesting and a richer way of thinking about business. What do you think someone with data responsibilities should be thinking about?
Well, I hope that they could get past the terrified phase
Rabbit
quickly.
in headlights.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's terrifying looking at all these things coming down the line, and you just horrified about what's ahead of you and how you're going to do it. I was doing yesterday. I did a little word search in the standards, and I can open them and have a look. And if you search for data, the word data, it appears I think it's 86 times in the two standards, and the word assumptions, it was over 30 times. And yeah, of course, obviously the data and the assumptions are really, really important. However, the context matters, and possibly matters more, because you want people to understand your thinking, and particularly when it comes to qualitative information, and we know sustainability data is full of it. And this is why then, if you look for the word explain in the standards, you'll see it over 20 times. And the context is there to help provide the insight and the rationale behind your thinking and your strategy and your actions. Because you need to really ensure that your stakeholders appreciate not just the numbers and the data, but actually the narrative that connects it all together.
It is within data professionals, there's been a big drive of how you tell a story with the information that it's available. Nobody is going to respond. I mean, I think there's sometimes the question about, do we need to rebrand sustainability? Because the science graphs are always, I feel, overwhelming to the average person. But how can you I always think it's how can you make it come alive? You've just given me an idea that I'm going to put some of these reporting frameworks into a word cloud next, just to see what word comes out most. And I think data would be up there.
Better be a big screen.
It would be an interesting one. I think that's going to be a task for this afternoon. So thanks, Jarlath, for taking something that I really needed to do off my list and do an hour word cloud. The next point that we were talking about is that the enterprise is well known, that what value is well known, but what value do you think sustainability data can add?
Yeah, obviously, yeah, data is really important for enterprise risk management, and most large companies will have some kind of framework in place. But what you don't necessarily hear about too much is how the sustainability data you're collecting has to align with your existing risk taxonomy, the what you've got already. You can't just, chuck it in and magically it, fits. And the other thing is that when you integrate this data, you shouldn't always expect to see, for example, a new sustainability risk pop out. That's not always the outcome. Instead, it's probably more likely to just simply amplify or multiply existing risks. And with TCFD, we talked about the transition risks around reputation and market and regulation issues. So that's possibly where you're going to see it pop out more. And as a result, the idea is that hopefully it leads to an improved view of your risk landscape, allowing you then to maybe take a more holistic view of what you've got, the threats that are coming, the opportunities that potentially you could think about, and how that then links back into strategy. And I guess it kind of almost goes without saying, but you probably do need to say it, that sustainability professionals really need to engage with the risk teams in their organizations, because the risk teams don't necessarily have that context, that background to ensure to understand what exactly you're giving them. They need that insight that you have, and you need to ensure that the sustainability information you're giving them actually goes in the right way and is meaningful and helpful to allow the risk team do what they need to do with it.
I mean, I think when you were saying about context earlier, I think the double materiality question is really, or need, did sort of shake up quite a few people when they were sort of, it's now about the risk that you need to consider about what your business activities are doing that then increase the risk to you as a business, because the way that you're gathering resources or using resources. I think it gives a richer profile of the risk, and it gives an opportunity to be thinking broader about how you mitigate or adapt to it, and to not bury an enterprise head in the sand of, well, that's not part of what we need to think about, where actually it is.
And it's an interesting point, because a question we get all the time is about materiality, and this, is it single, financial, double, triple, dynamic? I don't know I've lost count of how many different words there are to describe it. And part of it is simply because we've got two different professions coming together, which are quite used to using their own approach for materiality. And neither is right or wrong, but I think both professions are slightly horrified about how the other does it. And it's just, you know, the complementary. Well, maybe the complementary. You know, it's not as simple as I'm right and you're wrong. It's actually the important bit is how you bring them together, because they both have their value, depending on who's asking the question and who's looking at the answer.
Yeah. And the final point that we were going to discuss before we get to questions and stop the recording is, what would you say to an exco facing new reporting requirements on the ISSB standards? And I think I got that right, finally.
I'm not going to mention anything about business case. I'm just going to leave that one at the side of the road. I guess while sustainability disclosure is important clearly for transparency, its true value really lies in informing management judgment. We don't tend to hear a lot about this. So if the data that your teams are collecting, you know, with some considerable challenge, if it's only used as a page filler, then we'll all have failed. You have to ensure that it finds its way into decision-making processes. Data must drive action, and that in turn guides you to develop your strategies that, like I said, mitigate the risks and help you leverage or at least identify and pursue some of those opportunities. And that helps for innovation and delivering change. And that's what most companies try and achieve. And of course, also, you know, as a by the way, hopefully will prompt you to question how your company can really be fit for the future, not just for the now, but actually with one eye to the future. And I guess then by integrating sustainability and financial data together for example, with risk and leveraging the connectivity that is underpinned by the ISSB standards, you can hopefully make informed decisions that support all of your stakeholders.
Yeah. And I think that decision making and innovation is sort of what resonated with me when I was drawing out the concept zero approach, is that decisions now need to be more that need to be wider in intent. They've just got to be more holistic. And when I was looking at it from a point of with sustainability and the decision making that's traditionally been very revenue only, I feel now that the tensions are about, you need to protect the revenue because we need businesses to be successful so they can invest in change and transformation. But we now need to really grow our relationships. And I think in one of your answers you were saying earlier is that you need to go and talk to a wider part of the organisation. So even internally, you need to talk to a wider team, and externally, your supply chain needs to be part of the relationships that you tend to, or you as an enterprise tend to and take care of. And we need to be building resilience. And it's not just resilience within a person, but it's that business resilience of how is it going to adapt to the risks, the changes, the things that are going to come along that are unexpected now. But we also need to bring this information data together to be quite think about innovation in a regenerative way. Is like, what can we do that we haven't done before? And I think there's also the element of people need to go, no one person knows the 100% accurate path. We have to go with the information that we've got. We have to then turn it into the predictive analytics, which is future facing, which I don't think finance has been, well, they're not comfortable with qualitative data. And looking forward, that's a sea change, I think, within enterprise, because we need to get to the point that we're preempting and stopping actions before they're there. I've really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation so far, Jarlath. We've got some questions coming in from the people that have joined us, but we're just going to stop the recording now so everybody can take a sigh and be right. Okay, what's the real story? So get ready.
Thanks, Lisa.